Hey guys, welcome back. Today we are diving into the unbelievable story of how a tiny settlement in the marshes became the richest city on Earth during the Middle Ages. Venice didn't rise through conquest. It didn't rise through fertile fields or abundant resources. It rose through control. Control of trade routes, control of ships, control of information, and, eventually, control of money itself. This is a story about ingenuity, risk, and a city that reinvented the rules of medieval economics. From salt monopolies to shipbuilding powerhouses, from diplomatic networks to early banking systems, Venice turned the limitations of its geography into the foundation of a global empire, without ever marching an army across land. So sit back, relax, and let's explore how Venice transformed water, trade, and strategy into unimaginable wealth. When people imagine wealthy medieval cities, they picture stone walls, fertile fields, and armies guarding long land borders. Venice had none of that. What it had instead was water, everywhere, in every direction. The Venetian lagoon was a world of mudflats, shifting sandbanks, and narrow channels that disappeared with the tide. Walking across it was nearly impossible. Building anything permanent seemed unthinkable. And yet, sometime around the 5th and 6th centuries, refugees fleeing invasions on the mainland began settling on these tiny islands. At first, nothing about this place suggested future greatness. The land couldn't support crops. Freshwater was limited. Every building material had to be transported by boat. Even the ground beneath the houses was unstable, soft mud that swallowed weight. But water, the thing that made Venice difficult, also made it safe. No invader could march an army through marshland. No horseback riders could charge over tidal flats. The lagoon protected its people better than any man-made wall ever could. To build their city, Venetians used a quiet, ingenious method. They drove thousands upon thousands of wooden piles deep into the mud. These piles, made from alder, larch, and oak, did not rot underwater. Instead, they hardened over time, mineralizing slowly and forming a strong foundation. On top of these pillars, they placed thick wooden beams, then layers of stone. Slowly, the islands grew more stable. Slowly, the houses grew taller. Slowly, a city began to form. Life in Venice was deeply shaped by the rhythm of the lagoon. Boats were used for everything, carrying goods, carrying people, carrying stones for construction. The soundscape was different from any medieval city on land. Instead of horses, there were oars dipping into water. Instead of cartwheels, there were wooden boats gliding against docks. In the early centuries, Venice remained small, but its position, suspended between land and sea, offered a unique advantage. From here, Venetians could watch everything. Ships arriving from the Byzantine Empire, traders from the Islamic world, merchants from Northern Europe. Venice sat at the crossroads of ancient trade routes at exactly the moment when commerce was becoming the lifeblood of medieval economies. Venetians quickly understood their environment was not a limitation. It was leverage. The lagoon forced them to learn something other cities didn't: navigation, shipbuilding, and trade, all at once. You could not live in Venice without knowing the tides, the winds, and the channels. The sea was not simply outside the city. It flowed through it, shaping every decision. Early Venetian merchants traveled to nearby coastal towns selling salt, the most fundamental mineral in medieval trade. Venice produced it in shallow basins along the lagoon, using sunlight and evaporation to separate salt from seawater. Although simple, this became the city's first economic strength. Salt preserved food, supported armies, and was essential for every household. With control of salt production, Venice held something every region needed. As their expertise grew, Venetians expanded from coastal trade to long-distance voyages. Their ships, initially small and flat-bottomed, became larger, faster, and more reliable. Venetian sailors brought home goods from the Byzantine Empire: silk, spices, glassware, and precious metals. They carried timber, iron, and wool from Northern Europe. The city, built on water, became the meeting point where East and West passed through one another. The more Venetians traded, the more specialized they became. Shipbuilders learned how to construct vessels capable of surviving storms of the Adriatic. Navigators mastered new routes. Merchants developed accounting techniques to track goods across multiple voyages. What began as a refuge was turning into a commercial machine. By the 9th century, Venice had developed something rare for the medieval world: political independence. Technically, they maintained ties to the Byzantine Empire, but in practice, they governed themselves. And because no single ruler controlled the lagoon, power naturally shifted toward the merchant class, people whose wealth came not from land, but from trade. This created a society different from typical feudal Europe. In Venice, commerce was nobility. Ships were more important than castles. Trade agreements mattered more than battlefields. The streets of Venice, narrow canals flowing between houses of stone, became arteries of wealth. Every boat carried potential profit. Every merchant returning from abroad brought new knowledge, new goods, and new opportunities. And as the city grew richer, it began to shape itself around trade. Warehouses lined the canals. Market squares filled with goods from every corner of the Mediterranean. Foreign merchants stayed in special lodges designed to keep business organized and conflict low. Venice learned how to manage cultures, religions, and languages long before most of Europe even interacted with them. The lagoon continued to protect the city. When enemies attempted invasion, they found themselves slowed by mud, confused by channels, and exposed on flat, open water. Venice did not need a massive army. Its geography served as a natural fortress. And so, the city continued to grow, not by expanding its territory, but by expanding its influence. It built more ships, formed alliances, negotiated trading rights, and collected wealth through constant movement across the sea. By the end of the early Middle Ages, Venice had achieved something extraordinary. It had transformed from a cluster of muddy islands into a thriving maritime hub. Its buildings stood on pillars beneath the surface, hidden from sight. Its merchants crossed seas with confidence. Its economy no longer depended on land, but on the global flow of goods. The world was beginning to notice. A city built on water, fragile, improbable, remote, was slowly becoming one of the most powerful economic forces in Europe. Before Venice became the center of global commerce, before its fleets controlled the Mediterranean, before gold, silk, and spices filled its warehouses, there was salt. Salt was Venice's first real source of power, quiet, steady, and absolutely essential. In a world without refrigeration, salt was survival. It preserved meat for winter. It kept fish edible for long voyages. It protected entire cities from starvation. Armies could not march without salted food. Trade networks could not function without it. And Venice, sitting in the shallow waters of the lagoon, discovered early that it could produce salt better and cheaper than almost anyone else. The lagoon wasn't just water, it was a perfect natural factory. Wide, flat basins, strong sunlight in summer, steady winds that helped evaporation, and tidal rhythms that allowed controlled flooding. Venetians learned to channel seawater into shallow pools called saline fields. Over days, the water evaporated, leaving crystals of salt behind. Workers raked these crystals into piles, dried them, and loaded them onto boats. This simple cycle created one of the most valuable products in the medieval world. At first, salt was just a local commodity. Coastal communities needed it, fishermen relied on it, and farmers used it to preserve food. But as Venice explored wider trade routes, its leaders realized something important. Salt wasn't just a product. It was leverage. Cities on the mainland depended on Venetian salt to survive winter. Armies required it for long military campaigns. Merchants needed it to prepare goods for transport. Without salt, entire economies became vulnerable, and Venice held the supply. By the 10th century, Venice controlled nearly every salt field in the northern Adriatic. The city purchased rights to additional coastal regions, ensuring that no rival could match its production. The Venetian government imposed strict rules. Only Venetian ships could transport salt, and only Venetian merchants could sell it to inland markets. This was not simply trade. It was a monopoly, carefully built and fiercely protected. The lagoon's geography helped. No enemy could easily reach Venice's salt fields without navigating treacherous waters. And because the city was surrounded by water, transporting salt by boat was efficient. Boats could carry far more than carts, and Venetian sailors knew every channel, every tide, every safe passage. Meanwhile, inland cities, Verona, Padua, Milan, relied on Venice to supply their winter reserves. Grain they could produce themselves, salt they could not. So they traded. They exchanged wheat, livestock, timber, and metals for Venetian salt. Without realizing it, They were feeding Venice the very materials it needed to grow powerful. Salt became the backbone of Venice's early economy. It funded shipbuilding. It paid for diplomatic missions. It allowed Venice to send merchants to faraway markets. And as wealth accumulated, the city developed something rare in medieval Europe: financial stability. With money from salt, Venice began investing in infrastructure. The government repaired canals, built bridges, and expanded shipyards. The city employed full-time workers who specialized in maintaining docks and warehouses. Every improvement increased trade efficiency, and every improvement made Venice richer. Salt also strengthened Venice politically. The city used salt revenues to negotiate with rulers of inland territories. Venice offered steady supply in exchange for trading privileges, tax exemptions, and exclusive rights. The more cities depended on Venetian salt, the more influence Venice held. At its peak, Venice's salt network stretched deep into the European mainland. Caravans carried Venetian salt through mountain passes into Austria and Bavaria. River traders transported it along the Po River into northern Italy. Even distant settlements relied on the steady flow of white crystals from the lagoon. Salt was small, light, and easy to store, perfect for long-distance transport. And because the demand never fell, salt provided Venice with something extremely rare: a constant, predictable income. Other cities grew through conquest. Venice grew through consistency. It did not need to invade neighboring lands. It simply supplied them and profited. But Venice's leaders were not naive. They understood that monopolies attract rivals. So they protected their salt empire carefully. The government established heavy penalties for unauthorized salt trade. Ships carrying salt without permission could be confiscated. Merchants who tried to bypass Venice's system faced steep fines or exile. Venetian salt became so dominant that even mighty powers like the Holy Roman Empire negotiated directly with Venice for stable supply. And while salt alone did not make Venice the richest city on earth, it created the foundation on which all later wealth was built. Salt financed the construction of the Arsenal, Venice's future shipbuilding powerhouse. Salt funded Venice's earliest diplomatic missions to Constantinople. Salt allowed merchants to experiment with longer voyages to Egypt, to Syria, to the Greek islands, carrying Venetian salt outward and returning with luxury goods. Through salt, Venice learned how to manage trade, control supply chains, build bureaucratic systems, and stabilize its economy. Salt taught Venice how to become an empire without armies. By the time rival cities realized what Venice had achieved, it was already too late. Venice had transformed basic mineral flakes into a geopolitical tool, one that helped lift a small lagoon settlement into a dominant medieval power. This quiet white crystal, evaporated from seawater under the Adriatic sun, became the first key to a fortune that would reshape the economic map of Europe. If salt built Venice's early wealth, ships multiplied it. And nowhere was Venice's power more visible than in the Arsenal, the greatest shipbuilding complex in medieval Europe and one of the most efficient industrial centers the world had ever seen. From the outside, the Arsenal looked like an ordinary dockyard: stone walls, tall gates, and long roofs stretching toward the lagoon. But inside, it was something extraordinary, a place where organization, engineering, and discipline turned Venice into a maritime superpower. The Arsenal was enormous, a vast compound of workshops, warehouses, forges, rope-making halls, timber yards, and long water channels where ships floated as they were constructed. At its peak, more than 16,000 workers labored there: carpenters, blacksmiths, caulkers, rope makers, sailmakers, and specialized craftsmen who shaped every component of Venice's naval might. In a world where most ships took months or years to build, the Arsenal developed a new rhythm, one that felt almost impossible for its time. Venice built ships like an assembly line. Long before industrialization, long before factories, long before standardized mass production became common, Venetians discovered a system that allowed them to produce ships faster, cheaper, and more efficiently than any rival. Inside the Arsenal, materials flowed in one direction. Logs arrived at the timber yard. Iron moved to the forges. Ropes were twisted in the cordage halls. Sails were stitched in bright, sunlit lofts. Ship frames rose along the water channels. Workers specialized. One group shaped planks, another hammered nails, another coated hulls with pitch. No one wasted motion. No one duplicated tasks. The sequence was fixed from start to finish. The result was astonishing. A fully equipped galley, ready for sea, could be built in a matter of days when necessary. Eyewitness accounts describe wartime demonstrations where Venetians assembled a ship so quickly that foreign visitors believed it was staged. But it was not an illusion. It was the product of centuries of refinement. The Arsenal did not simply build ships. It built consistency. Every galley left the dockyard with the same dimensions, the same oars, the same sail layouts, the same storage compartments. This standardization meant that Venice could train sailors quickly, swap parts easily, and deploy fleets with incredible speed. Other medieval powers had ships. Venice had a system. And because the lagoon constantly shaped Venetian life, even ordinary citizens understood the water. Many young men had experience rowing, sailing, or navigating shallow channels long before joining the Navy. The Arsenal turned this cultural familiarity into military advantage. To sustain such production, Venice needed massive quantities of raw materials. Timber from the Alps, iron from northern Italy, pitch from Dalmatia, rope fibers from across the Mediterranean. Venice controlled these supplies through trade networks built over centuries. The city imported resources efficiently, stored them in arsenal warehouses, and distributed them through a system of strict regulation. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was left to chance. The arsenal even produced weapons, crossbows, armor plates, and later cannons, ensuring that Venetian ships were battle-ready upon launch. Workers held government positions. Their skills were protected. Their knowledge was guarded as state secrets. Inside the arsenal, Venice created a unity rarely seen elsewhere in the medieval world. Technology plus organization plus labor plus state power, all working together. And yet, what made the arsenal truly remarkable wasn't only its efficiency. It was the way it shaped Venice's identity. Ships were not just tools of war. They were instruments of commerce, diplomacy, and wealth. A Venetian galley leaving the arsenal carried more than cargo. It carried the city's influence. It brought salt to mainland towns, wool to Mediterranean ports, silk from Constantinople, spices from Alexandria, and silver from Europe. Every voyage strengthened Venice's position in global trade. Because Venice could build ships faster than its rivals, it could replace losses quickly. Because it could build them at scale, it controlled freight prices. Because it built standardized fleets, it could project power across seas with surprising coordination. The arsenal made Venice reliable, and in trade, reliability is power. Foreign merchants trusted Venetian convoys. Governments relied on Venetian transport. Even crusaders chartered Venetian ships when launching campaigns to the Holy Land. The arsenal became the beating heart of this system, supplying everything from merchant vessels to war galleys. And Venice guarded this advantage fiercely. Workers were sworn to secrecy. Foreign observers were restricted. Technical knowledge could not leave the city. The arsenal workers, known as arsenalati, formed a respected, powerful class within Venice. Their craftsmanship gave them prestige, and their labor was essential to the Republic's survival. They passed their skills down through generations, each improving upon the methods of those before. Inside the arsenal, the air was thick with the smell of pitch, sawdust, and salt water. The clatter of hammers on metal echoed across the halls. Workers moved in steady rhythm, guided by practiced routines. Boats slid gently along channels, their hulls slowly taking shape beneath lantern light. This constant motion turned the arsenal into something more than a shipyard. It became an engine of empire. With ships, Venice could enforce trade agreements. With ships, Venice could escort convoys safely. With ships, Venice could negotiate from a position of strength. With ships, Venice could explore, expand, and accumulate wealth. By the 13th and 14th centuries, the arsenal was the largest industrial complex in Europe. Long before factories, long before mechanical production, Venice proved that economic power doesn't require land. It requires organization. From this machine of wood, iron, sweat, and seawater emerged the fleets that made Venice rich beyond comparison. The arsenal gave the city something priceless: control of the sea. And from that control came dominance in trade, diplomacy, and wealth, the elements that would soon make Venice the richest city on earth. Most medieval cities were ruled by kings. Venice chose something different, and that difference shaped its wealth more than geography, salt, or even ships. Venice became a merchant republic, a place where power didn't come from royal blood, but from trade. Decisions weren't driven by emotion, inheritance, or military ambition. They were shaped by merchants who understood risk, profit, negotiation, and long-term strategy. This political structure was as unique as the city itself. At the top stood the Doge, the elected leader of Venice. His duty was to represent the state, to negotiate treaties, lead ceremonies, and maintain stability. But unlike kings, the Doge was not free to rule as he wished. He swore oaths limiting his power. He could not make major decisions alone. He could not wage war or sign trade agreements without approval. Behind him, directing nearly everything, was the Great Council, a massive assembly of Venice's noble families. These nobles were not feudal lords owning land. They were merchants, shipowners, bankers, traders, manufacturers. Their wealth came from movement, not territory. Their power came from networks, not armies. The Great Council determined laws, controlled trade, and elected officials. Beneath it, the Senate handled foreign affairs, intelligence, and the economy. Specialized committees oversaw taxation, shipbuilding, convoy protection, and diplomatic missions. This layered structure ensured one thing above all: no single person could threaten Venice's commercial interests. The system favored caution, calculation, and continuity, qualities essential for long-distance trade. Merchants needed stability, so Venice built a government that provided it. While other European cities were shaken by civil wars, succession crises, and feudal rivalries, Venice maintained unusual internal peace. This stability made foreign merchants feel safe, and safe markets attract wealth. Venice's merchant government also perfected the use of contracts, legal protections, and financial tools that encouraged risk-taking. A trader could borrow money to fund a voyage, share profits fairly with investors, and rely on courts to enforce agreements. In a world where piracy, storms, and shifting politics could ruin fortunes overnight, Venice's legal system reduced uncertainty. The city also developed sophisticated methods for managing convoys. Merchant ships traveled in fleets escorted by armed galleys, reducing the threat of pirates and hostile forces. Because Venice standardized ship design through the arsenal, these convoys moved with remarkable coordination. It was safe to trade under the Venetian flag, and safety generated profit. Meanwhile, Venice's diplomatic corps worked quietly but effectively. Ambassadors, called baili, lived in foreign cities, gathering information, negotiating privileges, and reporting intelligence back home. These reports formed a network of knowledge that shaped Venice's decisions. Venice understood the world not through crusades or conquest, but through data. When Venice negotiated with the Byzantine Empire, it focused not on land, but on trading rights, lower taxes, access to docks, warehouses for Venetian goods. When it engaged with Islamic states, it prioritized spice routes, safe passage, and stable markets. Venetian diplomacy was practical, not ideological. It navigated Christian and Muslim worlds with equal skill because profitability mattered more than religious tension. This flexibility allowed Venice to remain neutral in conflicts that might have destroyed another state. When two empires fought, Venice often traded with both sides. When others demanded loyalty, Venice offered services, banking, shipping, intelligence, instead of armies. The entire system operated with one goal: protect trade, expand trade, and profit from trade. Because merchants ran the government, decisions were grounded in economic logic. War was costly. Venice avoided it unless absolutely necessary. Alliances were transactional. Diplomacy was constant. Bureaucracy, though complex, allowed Venice to adapt quickly to changing markets. Inside the city, daily life reflected this commercial mindset. Banks recorded transactions with unusual precision. Courts handled maritime disputes efficiently. Ship captains signed contracts outlining every detail of a voyage: goods, risks, payments, penalties. Every part of the Republic supported the movement of goods. This structure had another crucial effect. It protected Venice from the sudden collapses that often accompanied monarchies. A king could make one disastrous decision. A merchant council rarely did. Where monarchies were fragile, Venice was stable. Stability created trust, and trust attracted investment. Merchants from across Europe brought their goods to Venice because they knew contracts mattered here. They knew their ships would be protected, their disputes judged fairly, their profits taxed predictably. Venice offered something rare in the Middle Ages, a functioning, reliable economic system. This meant Venice didn't need natural resources to become rich. It became a platform, a marketplace where the world exchanged goods. Venetian merchants imported raw materials from one region, transformed them with skilled artisans, then exported them elsewhere. Glass from Murano, silk, wool, metalwork, all moved through Venice's canals to foreign markets. The merchant republic also valued education. Young nobles studied accounting, navigation, languages, and diplomacy. They traveled with senior merchants to learn routes and markets. They represented Venice abroad long before they held political office. Knowledge, not lineage, created influence. This mindset helped Venice adapt when global trade changed. New routes opened. Venice redirected ships. Taxes and foreign ports shifted. Venice renegotiated. Demand for goods fluctuated. Venice adjusted production. A king's pride could destroy a kingdom, but a merchant's logic kept Venice wealthy. By the 12th and 13th centuries, Venice had become something Europe had never seen before, a republic built around global commerce, operating like a corporation, defended by a navy, guided by profit, and powered by shipyards and diplomacy. This system allowed Venice to expand its influence without conquering land. Where feudal lords collected grain, Venice collected information. Where kings built castles, Venice built markets. Where others worshipped military victory, Venice worshipped economic advantage. And while this system was far from perfect, rigid, oligarchic, and secretive, it accomplished something extraordinary. It made Venice one of the richest, most stable, and most strategically advanced cities on Earth. The world was beginning to depend on Venice, and with that dependence came unprecedented wealth. In the medieval world, nothing traveled farther, cost more, or shaped economies more deeply than spices. Cinnamon, pepper, cloves, ginger, nutmeg. These were not luxuries for the rich. They were everyday necessities, medicines, preservatives, flavorings, incense, even status symbols used in royal courts and religious ceremonies. Spices were the gold dust of the Middle Ages, light enough to carry in a single hand, yet valuable enough to fund armies. And Venice placed itself at the very center of this global demand. The journey of a single peppercorn was astonishing. Harvested in India or Southeast Asia, passed through Arab traders, loaded onto Red Sea ships, carried across caravan routes, transferred onto Mediterranean vessels, taxed at multiple borders, and finally unloaded onto the docks of Venice. Every step added cost, danger, and complexity. But Venetians learned to turn this complexity into opportunity. Venice didn't grow spices. Venice didn't harvest spices. Venice didn't even sail to Asia directly. Instead, Venice mastered what it always mastered: control of the middle. Venetian merchants formed strong commercial alliances with Islamic traders in Alexandria, Damascus, and the ports of the Levant. These relationships were built through decades of negotiation, stable pricing agreements, shared risk, and political neutrality. Venice understood something other European powers did not. You don't need to conquer land to profit from it. You just need to control the flow of goods. When spice caravans reached the Middle East, Venetian ships were often waiting. Their galleys carried spices across the Mediterranean faster and more safely than any competitor. The Arsenal's standardized ships allowed Venice to schedule departures with remarkable precision. Convoys traveled in groups for protection, and their routes were carefully mapped. Once the ships reached Venice, everything shifted. The city became a marketplace where spices were sorted, weighed, taxed, and sold. Pepper from India, cinnamon from Sri Lanka, cloves from the Moluccas, all passed through Venetian warehouses. The smell of spices filled the air around the Rialto district, where merchants negotiated prices and recorded transactions in thick ledgers. Venice built a system that transformed spices into guaranteed profit. First, the government imposed strict regulations on spice trade. Certain families held long-standing rights to import and distribute specific goods. Taxes were calculated with precision. Quality was inspected by officials trained to identify impurities. This created stability in a market known everywhere else for volatility. Second, Venice handled spices in massive volume. The city bought in bulk from the east and sold in smaller quantities across Europe. This compression of scale allowed Venetians to dictate prices. They could raise the cost of pepper in France or lower it in Germany with a single policy decision. Third, Venice invested in port infrastructure that ensured smooth distribution. Warehouses stood beside canals. Merchants could move goods directly from ship to storage. Boats navigated through the city with ease, delivering spices to foreign traders. All of this made Venice indispensable. A French king could not season his meals without Venetian pepper. A German merchant could not stock his shelves without Venetian ginger. Italian cities could not bake their bread or produce their medicines without Venetian cargo. Spices became a constant river of wealth flowing through Venice, predictable, steady, and enormous. But profit alone didn't explain Venice's dominance. Success came from two additional advantages: knowledge and timing. Venetians maintained a powerful network of informants, merchants, and diplomats across the Mediterranean. They knew when harvests failed, when wars disrupted routes, when taxes changed, when storms damaged ports. This information allowed them to adjust shipments, raise prices, or buy stock before competitors realized shortages were coming. Timing mattered dearly in the spice trade. A single ship arriving early could triple profits. A ship arriving late might lose everything. Venice organized its fleets with the precision of a modern logistics company. Convoys left on fixed schedules. Routes were charted by skilled navigators. Messages traveled between outposts by fast boats. By the 13th century, Venice had something far more valuable than spice: reliability. While other merchants risked storms and pirates, Venetian convoys were watched over, protected, and insured by the state. European buyers trusted Venetian spice above all others. Spices enriched Venice beyond imagination. The revenue funded palaces along the Grand Canal. It supported painters, architects, and musicians. It strengthened the arsenal, expanded trade networks, and bought political influence in foreign courts. Spices even shaped Venice's appearance. Wealthy merchant families built marble facades, financed churches, and commissioned art. Silk, gold leaf, and exotic pigments, many purchased through spice routes, filled Venetian workshops. The city glowed with color, texture, and detail found nowhere else in Europe. But spices also brought something more subtle: a mindset. To dominate the spice trade, Venice had to understand multiple worlds: Christian Europe, Islamic Syria and Egypt, the Byzantine Empire, and the distant East. Venetian merchants learned languages, currencies, and customs. They negotiated across religious lines, maintained alliances through turbulent periods, and adapted faster than rival powers. This flexibility made the Venetian economy unusually resilient. When wars disrupted one route, Venice shifted to another. When rivals raised taxes, Venice negotiated or found alternatives. When demand changed, Venice adjusted its fleets. The spice trade taught Venice that wealth came not from land, but from movement, from being the essential bridge between producers and consumers. But even as Venice grew rich, the world around it began to change. New powers were rising. New ships were being built. New ocean routes were opening. For now, though, Venice sat at the center of a golden web. From India to the Middle East, from Alexandria to the Adriatic, a long chain of trade converged into narrow Venetian canals. And every peppercorn, every grain of cinnamon, every rare clove carried with it a fraction of the wealth that would make Venice the richest city on earth. By the beginning of the 13th century, Venice was not just a city of merchants. It was a city of negotiators, capable of shaping events far beyond the lagoon. The Fourth Crusade became the most dramatic example, a moment when Venice, with no army of its own, redirected the course of history through contracts, ships, and strategy. It began with an agreement. Crusaders from across Europe planned a military expedition to the Holy Land. They needed transportation, a fleet large enough to carry tens of thousands of knights, horses, and supplies across the Mediterranean. Only one city had the shipyards, organization, and expertise to make this possible: Venice. The Crusaders approached Venice with an ambitious request: build ships for an army of enormous size, and do it within a year. The Venetians agreed, but in typical Venetian fashion, they set strict terms. Venice would supply a massive fleet, crewmen for every vessel, and provisions for the entire army. In exchange, the Crusaders would pay a colossal sum, a sum so large that, if paid in full, it would cover nearly half of Venice's annual revenue. The arsenal roared into action. Carpenters, rope makers, and sailors worked day and night. Timber flowed in from the Alps. Iron arrived from northern Italy. Pitch was shipped from Dalmatia. The shipyards produced one of the largest fleets Europe had ever seen. But when the time came to depart, a problem emerged. The Crusaders didn't have enough money. Many soldiers had failed to arrive. Others brought less than promised. The total payment fell far short of the agreed amount. To Venice, this wasn't simply a loss. It was a threat to everything the Republic had built: the arsenal, the treasury, the stability of the merchant government. Venice could not allow such a debt to go unpaid. So the Doge, Enrico Dandolo, proposed a solution. If the Crusaders could not pay in coin, they could pay in service. Venice needed help capturing the Adriatic port city of Zara, a commercial rival that had turned against Venetian influence. The Crusaders, desperate, indebted, and lacking alternatives, agreed. The fleet sailed not to the Holy Land, but to Zara. The city fell. The debt remained. What followed became one of the most controversial episodes in medieval history. The crusade, still unable to pay, was drawn deeper into Venice's influence. Byzantine exiles approached Venice with an offer: help them reclaim the imperial throne of Constantinople, and Venice would receive land, trade privileges, and payment. Again, Venice recognized opportunity. Again, the Crusaders became instruments of Venetian strategy. In 1204, the fleet sailed to Constantinople, the greatest city of the Eastern Mediterranean. What began as a crusade to the Holy Land transformed into an attack on a Christian empire. Constantinople fell. Its palaces were looted, its treasures carried away, and Venice claimed much of the reward. The Republic did not want territory for agriculture or population growth. It wanted access, harbors, and trade routes. From the conquest, Venice secured key ports across the Aegean Sea, islands that controlled shipping lanes, Byzantine customs privileges, entire waterfront districts for Venetian merchants. The Fourth Crusade was not Venice's finest moral moment, and medieval chroniclers called it a scandal. But to Venice, it was a brutally effective calculation, a chance to reshape the economic map of the Mediterranean. And it worked. Venice emerged from the crusade with more maritime bases, more influence, and more trading rights than ever before. Constantinople, weakened and fragmented, became dependent on Venetian merchants. The Republic now controlled a chain of ports that allowed its fleets to move confidently across the Eastern Mediterranean. With these gains, Venice secured safer routes for spices, favorable tax treatment, expanded markets for its goods, and new positions to challenge rival cities like Genoa. The consequences were long-lasting. For nearly half a century, Venice enjoyed unparalleled dominance in the Eastern Mediterranean. The arsenal supported this expansion. The merchant republic administered it. Diplomats protected it. And spices, silk, and precious metals flowed into the city with even greater volume. But perhaps the most telling part of this story is how Venice achieved it. Not through crusader zeal, not through conquest for glory, not through kings and knights seeking fame. Venice acted through contracts, negotiations, debts, logistics, and strategic opportunism. It used tools other medieval powers barely understood. Where others saw war, Venice saw routes. Where others saw ideology, Venice saw access. Where others marched armies, Venice moved ships and money. The Fourth Crusade revealed a truth about the Republic. Venice's real battlefield was the marketplace, and its real victories were economic. The city's leaders knew that no empire of land could match the wealth generated by controlling sea routes. And by securing these routes, Venice fortified its position as the richest city of the Middle Ages. In the years that followed, Venetian merchants expanded deeper into Byzantine markets. The city's wealth surged. Palaces along the Grand Canal grew more ornate. Churches glowed with gold mosaics. The merchant families who oversaw Venice's politics rose to even greater prominence. History remembers the Fourth Crusade as a moment of betrayal. Venice remembers it as a moment of transformation, the moment when it stepped fully into its role as a maritime empire. And while this chapter stained the Republic's reputation, it also anchored Venice's dominance for generations, shaping the city that would soon become the financial and commercial powerhouse of the medieval world. As Venice expanded its influence across the Eastern Mediterranean, one rival grew impossible to ignore: Genoa. If Venice was a merchant republic built on salt, diplomacy, and strategic patience, Genoa was its mirror image, ambitious, aggressive, and equally determined to dominate Mediterranean trade. The two cities were startlingly similar. Both had powerful navies. Both were run by merchant elites. Both mastered banking, shipbuilding, and long-distance commerce. And both understood that whoever controlled the Mediterranean controlled one of the most profitable economic systems of the medieval world. Competition was inevitable. It began quietly, with disputes over trade routes. Genoese merchants gained influence in the Black Sea, where grain, fur, wax, and slaves formed a thriving market. Venice, meanwhile, strengthened its position in the Aegean and Levant, securing ports from the fragmented Byzantine Empire. At first, both cities operated in parallel, rivals, but not yet enemies. But as global demand for spices, silk, and luxury goods grew, routes narrowed. Markets overlapped, alliances shifted, and the Mediterranean tightened into a zero-sum game. Every victory for Venice was a loss for Genoa. Every Genoese gain threatened Venetian merchants. Two republics, nearly equal in power, faced one another across the sea. The conflict escalated into a series of naval wars, not grand battles for land, but fierce competition for access, privilege, and economic dominance. War suited neither republic. Ships were expensive. Fleets required constant rebuilding. Trade halted whenever conflict erupted. But both cities believed that control of sea routes justified the cost. The Adriatic, the Aegean, the Black Sea, all became arenas where Venetian and Genoese fleets clashed. The water carried the echoes of oars striking in rhythm, sails tightening in the wind, and the heavy impact of ships colliding. Naval battles of this era were brutal, fought at close range with boarding hooks, crossbows, and fire. Every confrontation was high stakes. Losing a fleet meant losing trade for years. Losing trade meant losing influence. Losing influence meant fading from the economic map. Yet Venice possessed an advantage that Genoa struggled to match: the arsenal. Even after heavy losses, Venice could rebuild ships faster than any rival. The assembly line model, perfected over centuries, allowed the Republic to replace destroyed vessels quickly. Genoa had skilled shipbuilders, but lacked Venice's scale. This difference shaped the timing of wars. Genoa often won dramatic naval battles, fast, decisive clashes that destroyed Venetian squadrons. But Venice won the wars of attrition. It could absorb losses, rebuild, reorganize, and return to sea while Genoa strained to maintain momentum. Both cities also fought through diplomacy. Venice strengthened alliances with Byzantine and Middle Eastern powers. Genoa partnered with rivals of Venice, including the powerful city of Pisa. Each side maneuvered to isolate the other economically and politically. The tension peaked in the War of Chioggia, 1378 to 1381, the most dangerous moment in Venetian history. Genoa launched a daring campaign, sailing into the Venetian lagoon itself. For the first time, the Republic faced the real threat of annihilation. Panic spread through the city. The enemy was at their doorstep, and defeat seemed possible. But Venice did what it always did in moments of crisis. It organized. The Great Council mobilized resources. The arsenal worked around the clock. Citizens volunteered, rowing alongside professional sailors. Merchants funded emergency ships. The lagoon became a fortress of determination. What saved Venice was not luck, but resilience. Genoese forces held strong positions, but they could not match the speed with which Venice reorganized. Slowly, methodically, Venice pushed them back. Supply lines tightened. Reinforcements arrived. And finally, the Venetian fleet, rebuilt with astonishing speed, trapped the Genoese ships in the small port of Chioggia. After months of struggle, Genoa surrendered. The war had drained both republics, but Venice emerged the clear victor. For the first time in over a century, it had decisively broken Genoa's momentum. The consequences were enormous. Genoa remained an important trading power, but its ambitions were permanently restrained. Its influence in the Black Sea diminished. Its networks weakened. Internal politics grew unstable. Venice, on the other hand, entered a new age of confidence. The victory taught Venice that its greatest strength was not aggression, but endurance. The arsenal's output, the stability of the merchant republic, the city's ability to coordinate under pressure. These factors turned a fragile lagoon city into a Mediterranean empire. After Chioggia, Venice tightened its hold over eastern trade. It expanded its port rights in Constantinople. It strengthened control of Aegean islands and outposts. It solidified its spice networks through Alexandria and Syria. With Genoa weakened, Venice moved almost unchallenged along the sea routes that fed Europe's hunger for Eastern goods. But the rivalry did more than reshape markets. It forced Venice to innovate constantly. Better ships, better navigation, better banking, better diplomacy. Competition pushed the Republic to refine its systems beyond anything seen before in the Middle Ages. In some ways, Genoa helped Venice become great, even as the two cities battled fiercely. By the late 14th century, Venice stood unrivaled in the Mediterranean. Its fleets controlled major shipping lanes. Its merchants dominated Asian-European exchange. Its government maintained stability while other powers fractured. Venice had survived its greatest rival and now stood ready to transform itself from a maritime trading power into a global economic force. The lagoon city had proven something extraordinary. You do not need an empire of land to become an empire of wealth. You need ships, strategy, and the endurance to face any storm. As Venice secured control of sea routes and trade networks, its merchants faced a new challenge: money itself. Shipping goods across continents required more than ships and diplomacy. It required a financial system capable of handling risk, distance, currency exchange, investment, and trust. Most medieval cities relied on simple transactions: coins exchanged for goods, debts handled privately, and wealth stored physically. But Venice operated on a different scale. Its merchants crossed seas, negotiated with foreign powers, and conducted deals worth fortunes. Traditional methods were no longer enough. And so, quietly and gradually, Venice became one of the first places in Europe to develop the foundations of early capitalism. It began with credit. A merchant preparing for a voyage to Alexandria needed funds to purchase cargo, pay sailors, insure the ship, and secure docking rights. Few individuals possessed that kind of liquid wealth. So merchants partnered with investors, forming agreements in which profits and losses were shared. This was known as the commenda, a financial contract that revolutionized trade. One partner provided capital, another sailed on the voyage and managed operations. If the journey succeeded, both profited. If it failed, risk was distributed. The commenda encouraged exploration, innovation, and long-distance commerce. It turned risk, once the enemy of business, into something manageable. But Venice did not stop there. As trade expanded, merchants needed a safer way to store wealth. Carrying heavy bags of silver across long distances invited theft. Transporting coin between countries meant navigating different currencies, weights, and purity levels. Payment could be delayed for months while ships crossed oceans. Venice's solution was the bill of exchange. This simple sheet of parchment allowed money to move without physically moving coins. A merchant could deposit silver in Venice and receive a written promise of equivalent value in another city. The document traveled instead of the money. It could be redeemed, traded, or held as credit. For the first time, wealth became transferable through writing, not metal. Banks emerged naturally from this process. Venetian bankers, often wealthy merchant families, accepted deposits, issued credit, and kept detailed ledgers. Their offices, located near the busy Rialto markets, became essential for anyone participating in international trade. The Rialto itself transformed into a financial hub. Merchants met under shaded arcades to negotiate contracts. Money changers exchanged dozens of foreign currencies. Clerks recorded debts, payments, and interest rates with remarkable precision. The city developed a financial rhythm: mornings for negotiations, afternoons for legal registration, evenings for balancing accounts. Venetian bookkeepers used double-entry accounting, a method that tracked both incoming and outgoing values, a system so accurate that it remains the foundation of modern accounting. This innovation allowed merchants to monitor profits, losses, assets, and liabilities with clarity no other medieval economy possessed. But Venice's brilliance lay not in isolated innovations, but in how all these mechanisms work together. When ships returned from long voyages, merchants did not simply unload cargo. They settled contracts, repaid investors, reinvested profits, and prepared for the next opportunity. The entire city operated like a finely tuned machine. Trade fed finance. Finance fed trade. Another major innovation arose in response to risk: insurance. A single storm could destroy a ship and the fortunes invested in it. Pirates, shifting alliances, and unexpected wars could wipe out years of planning. To reduce this uncertainty, Venice developed marine insurance policies that allowed merchants to pay a fee in exchange for protection against loss. This changed everything. A merchant could now take bolder risks. Investors could safely fund larger operations. Ships could carry expensive goods without fear of ruin. Insurance stabilized the entire system. Meanwhile, the Venetian government itself relied on financial innovation. In wartime, instead of demanding sudden taxes, Venice issued government bonds, known as prestiti. Wealthy citizens lent money to the state and received regular interest in return. Prestiti helped Venice fund fleets, build defenses, and maintain diplomatic missions without destabilizing the economy. They also created a deep connection between merchants and the state. Venice depended on the wealth of its citizens, and its citizens depended on the stability of Venice. This mutual interdependence became one of the Republic's greatest strengths. The city also introduced something that Europe had rarely seen before: a state-backed bank. The Banco di Rialto, founded in the 16th century and rooted in early medieval practices, allowed transfers between accounts without physical money. Merchants could settle large payments simply by writing instructions in the bank's register. This system reduced fraud, stabilized currency, and accelerated commerce. For foreign merchants, Venice's financial system became irresistible. Deals were safe. Contracts were enforceable. Currency exchange was reliable. Courts resolved disputes quickly. Banks provided credit with clear terms. Venice turned trust into a commodity and sold it better than anyone else. Over time, Venice's financial structures began influencing other European powers. Italian banking families carried Venetian methods to Northern Europe. The Dutch and English adopted similar credit systems. Even early stock exchanges drew inspiration from Venetian models of shared investment. Venice never had the largest territory or the largest army, but it had something more powerful: a functioning economic engine that could multiply wealth faster than conquests ever could. Venice did not conquer markets by force. It conquered them by becoming indispensable. If you were a merchant in Germany, France, or Spain, you needed Venice's banking system. If you traded in the Eastern Mediterranean, you needed Venetian credit. If you wanted stable currency exchange, reliable insurance, safe transfers, or trusted contracts, you looked to Venice. Slowly, quietly, the city transformed from a maritime republic into something more: a financial capital, a pioneer of economic methods that would later define capitalism. Every ledger entry recorded in the Rialto, every contract enforced by Venetian courts, every ship insured before leaving the lagoon. These were the elements that made Venice rich beyond comparison. By mastering money, Venice mastered the world that money governed. And with banking, credit, insurance, and accounting working in harmony, the city fortified its economic empire, one that rested not on land or armies, but on a system of trust, risk-sharing, and innovation centuries ahead of its time. As Venice tightened its hold on trade routes and perfected the flow of wealth across its canals, another transformation began quietly within the city. Ships brought cargoes of raw silk, precious stones, pigments, and rare minerals from distant lands. Instead of sending these treasures onward untouched, Venice started to reshape them. The city that once served only as a gateway between East and West began turning imported materials into refined objects that captivated the courts of Europe. This shift was subtle at first. A few skilled foreign weavers settled along Venetian alleys, bringing knowledge from Byzantium and Persia. Their looms produced fabrics finer than anything Europe had seen before. Their threads dyed in deep reds and brilliant blues that caught the light like polished stone. Soon Venetian merchants realized that weaving silk within the city produced far greater profit than merely shipping bolts of cloth across borders. Workshops multiplied, techniques improved, and the hum of looms became a familiar sound drifting from upper floors of cramped houses. Venetian silk became a luxury in its own right. It appeared in royal courts, in churches, in festivals that filled the lagoon with color. Even before the Renaissance had fully taken shape, Venice had already mastered the art of blending imported materials with local craftsmanship. Wealth was no longer only something that arrived by ship. It was something created within the city itself. But nothing transformed Venice more profoundly than glassmaking. Fearing fires caused by the furnaces that burned day and night, the government moved every glass workshop to the nearby island of Murano. What began as a safety measure evolved into something far greater, an isolated world of craftsmen, protected by the state, devoted entirely to perfecting a material that would define Venice for centuries. On Murano, the glow of furnaces never faded. Masters taught apprentices how to shape molten glass into forms that seemed impossible. Crystal-clear vessels, delicate ornaments, bright beads, mirrors that reflected with unprecedented clarity. Some techniques were kept so secret that glassmakers were forbidden to leave the island, and yet their creations traveled everywhere. European kings displayed Murano chandeliers in their halls. Noble families handed down Venetian mirrors as treasured heirlooms. Murano glass became not only an export, but a symbol of Venice itself. Fragile yet enduring, refined yet born from fire. Other crafts grew alongside it. Pigment makers ground stones from Afghanistan and Asia into powders that painters coveted. Metalworkers shaped jewelry inspired by Byzantine and Islamic designs. Workshops distilled perfumes from Eastern oils. Lace, velvet, polished stones, and miniature luxury objects filled the market stalls of the Rialto. Each trade reinforced the others. Each added another thread to the tapestry of Venetian identity. The city created an environment where beauty carried real economic weight. It was not enough to possess wealth. Venice understood the importance of transforming it into something visible, tangible, and difficult to imitate. Merchants displayed silk patterns unique to their workshops. Glassmakers introduced colors and shapes that no rival city could replicate. Over time, Venice became known not only for what it traded, but for what it crafted. Luxury became a language that connected the city's artisans, merchants, and rulers. This shift also changed how Venice looked. Palaces along the Grand Canal gleamed with imported marble and colored glass. Churches sparkled under mosaics made with pigments ground in local workshops. Wealth from trade expressed itself in architecture, art, and public life. When foreign merchants arrived, they stepped into a city that seemed to radiate its own brilliance, a stage built from the very goods Venice sold to the world. Luxury production also offered something vitally important: stability. When wars disrupted spice routes, Venice could still export silk. When rival cities challenged its power at sea, Murano glass continued to command high prices. Luxury goods were light, valuable, and always in demand. They moved easily across borders and could be produced even when fleets were docked and trade slowed. In a world of shifting alliances and unpredictable seas, this resilience protected Venice's economic foundation. By the 15th century, Venice no longer relied solely on the movement of ships. Its economy rested equally on the work of craftsmen whose hands shaped beauty from raw materials carried across continents. The city became the place where East and West met not only in trade, but in artistic expression. What began as a practical decision to profit from imported goods evolved into a cultural identity. Venice turned craftsmanship into power, aesthetics into currency, and beauty into a form of influence that spread across Europe. Luxury, in the end, was another kind of empire, one crafted not from conquest, but from refinement. And Venice ruled it with quiet confidence, shaping tastes, traditions, and desires far beyond the lagoon. As Venice's wealth grew, so did the complexity of the world around it. Trade depended not only on ships and goods, but on something far more fragile: knowledge. The weather in the Levant, the shifting alliances of Italian cities, the ambitions of kings, the strength of rival powers. Every piece of information had the power to shape Venetian commerce. And so, quietly, efficiently, Venice built one of the earliest and most effective intelligence networks in Europe. It began with diplomacy. While other states sent emissaries only during crises, Venice maintained permanent representatives in foreign courts. These men, called baili, lived for years in places such as Constantinople, Alexandria, Cairo, and Damascus. Their role was not limited to negotiations. They observed markets, recorded political tensions, tracked tax changes, and followed the mood of rulers. Their letters, written in careful, coded language, traveled back to Venice on merchant vessels. Each letter added another piece to the mosaic of knowledge guiding the Republic's decisions. Within Venice, This information flowed into the hands of councils and senators who examined every detail. They studied grain shortages along the Black Sea. They noted Ottoman military movements. They observed when demand for spices rose in Northern Europe or when rival powers tried to negotiate new privileges. The reports were methodical, precise, and often treated as confidential. What emerged was a government that made decisions slowly but with remarkable clarity. Venice rarely acted on impulse. The Republic watched, calculated, and only then moved, always in ways that protected its commercial interests. The intelligence network did not end with diplomats. Merchants themselves served as informants. They traveled farther than any official, spoke with local traders, witnessed markets firsthand, and often sensed shifts long before foreign rulers did. When these merchants returned home, they discussed what they had seen in taverns, markets, and squares. The government listened. Every traveler, every sailor, every captain added something valuable to the city's collective understanding. In this way, information became one of Venice's greatest resources. It helped the Republic avoid unnecessary wars. It allowed Venice to anticipate famine and prepare grain reserves. It guided negotiations for trade privileges, ensuring that Venetian merchants always secured the most favorable terms. And yet, Venice understood that information was dangerous when uncontrolled. The city developed strict rules on secrecy. Important documents were stored in locked chests within government buildings. Decisions of the Great Council were recorded but guarded. Diplomats swore oaths not to reveal state affairs. Even the arsenal operated behind walls not only to protect its shipbuilding secrets, but to prevent foreign spies from learning how Venice built fleets so quickly. Letters entering the city were sometimes opened and inspected by officials who monitored for suspicious messages. Merchants knew that careless speech could have consequences. Venice valued privacy not as a cultural trait, but as a matter of survival. Over time, secrecy became woven into the Republic's identity. Visitors often described Venice as a place where nothing happened by accident, where decisions were made behind closed doors, where the government seemed to sense events long before they became visible. To some, this made the city appear mysterious. To Venice, it was simply practical. Information kept the city alive. Diplomacy, too, became a tool of quiet power. Venice rarely demanded, it negotiated. When foreign powers argued, Venice positioned itself as mediator. When rulers sought loans, Venice calculated interest carefully. When a kingdom needed ships, Venice offered them, for a price. By maintaining friendly ties with both Christian and Muslim powers, the Republic accessed markets that others could not reach. Through this careful balance, Venice built a world where conflict could be avoided and profit preserved. Its ambassadors attended courts not with armies behind them, but with contracts, gifts, and promises of trade. They listened more than they spoke. They observed more than they participated. This restrained diplomacy made Venice predictable, and predictability attracted merchants from every corner of the Mediterranean. What set Venice apart was not the scale of its intelligence network, but how seamlessly it integrated into daily governance. Information shaped shipping schedules, guided investment strategies, influenced where new warehouses were built, and even determined which ports needed protection from pirates. No detail was too small for consideration. Through this constant vigilance, Venice created something rare in the medieval world, a state that understood its environment with remarkable clarity. The city moved confidently because it moved with knowledge. It avoided many dangers because it sensed them long before they arrived. And it secured opportunities because it recognized them the moment they appeared. Diplomacy and intelligence were not heroic or dramatic. They were quiet, patient, and almost invisible. Yet they were essential to Venice's success. Without them, the Republic could not have protected its trade routes, preserved its independence, or maintained the stability that allowed wealth to accumulate across centuries. Venice thrived not simply because it sailed faster or traded better, but because it understood the world more deeply than its rivals. Its real strength lay not in its canals, its warehouses, or even its fleets, but in its ability to see. Across the long arc of its history, Venice grew not by conquering land, but by choosing the sea. From the quiet salt fields of the lagoon to the vast docks of the arsenal, from silk workshops humming along narrow alleys to the glowing furnaces of Murano, everything in the city pointed outward, toward distant shores, distant markets, distant possibilities. What made Venice extraordinary was not any single invention or industry, but the way each part of its world connected gently, steadily, with every other. Its salt routes funded shipyards. Its shipyards protected merchants. Its merchants gathered information that guided the Republic. Its diplomats turned information into privilege. Its craftsmen transformed raw materials into objects of beauty that traveled across Europe. Its banks and contracts turned risk into something that could be carried, measured, and shared. Nothing existed in isolation. The city functioned like a living organism, each system supporting the next. Even the lagoon itself, shallow, shifting, and seemingly fragile, gave Venice the protection it needed to grow without fear of sudden invasion. Geography shaped its habits. It learned caution, patience, and the value of endurance. It learned that strength could come from understanding rather than force, from negotiation rather than conquest. By the time Venice stood at the height of its wealth, it had created something rare in the medieval world, a society held together not by the will of a single ruler, but by the quiet alignment of shared interests. Merchants, artisans, sailors, bankers, and diplomats all depended on one another. Their combined efforts produced a stability that allowed generations to refine techniques, expand networks, and gather wealth without interruption. Walking through Venice in the centuries of its greatness, one would have seen evidence of this cooperation everywhere. Ships glided through canals loaded with spices and silk. Glassmakers shaped molten crystal into delicate forms. Accountants recorded trade in careful handwriting. Ambassadors arrived with letters sealed in wax. The city moved with a deliberate calm, confident in the systems that supported it. What made Venice the richest city on earth was not luck and not simply access to trade. It was the ability to recognize opportunity in unlikely places, in salt flats, in narrow waterways, in the skills of foreign craftsmen, in the value of information carried quietly across borders. Venice understood that wealth could be built from connections, from patience, and from the careful weaving together of many smaller strengths. Even when the world changed, when new powers rose and new ocean routes shifted the center of global trade, the legacy of Venice endured. Its methods spread across Europe. Its financial practices shaped early capitalism. Its glass and silk remained symbols of refinement. And the idea that a city could thrive not by conquest, but by cooperation lingered long after its fleets faded from the Mediterranean. In the end, Venice's story is not simply one of economic triumph. It is a reminder that endurance comes from harmony, from systems that reinforce one another, from people who understand the value of precision and restraint, from a society willing to adapt without losing its identity. Venice chose the sea, and in doing so, it chose a path that few others imagined possible. The city still stands today, its palaces reflected in the quiet water. And if you listen closely, you can almost hear the echoes of the workshops, the docks, the markets. The steady, measured rhythm of a place that once understood the world more clearly than any other and turned that understanding into centuries of remarkable wealth.